Do you know that horrible feeling when you begin to tell a story, but it's clear that the other person doesn't care? They'll look around, they'll pretend to listen, and they won't ask you any questions. That's not happening. Sometimes you just want to strangle them on the spot, but above all, it leaves you feeling embarrassed, like it's pointless to even talk in the first place. This is the same thing that happens when you don't write notes in your book. Now, okay, I exaggerate a bit, but the point stands. Without an active component in your reading, it might become passive, and you might drift off. We've both felt this. You read a paragraph, you get to the end and think, what the hell did I just read? Your eyes were drifting over the words and nothing was really getting absorbed. This is passive reading. It's what leaves you feeling irritated when you get to the end of the book, feeling like you haven't learned anything. It stops you from remembering the best points. And worst of all, it's just a waste of your time. I've experienced all of these things. As much as I love reading now, it was miserable in the past when I had to struggle with all these things. But I found my saving light in the form of a pencil. Because writing is by far the easiest way to counter passive reading. It forces you to interact with the author, more like a dialogue rather than a one-way conversation. This back and forth is how you process ideas. It's how you remember more. And it's how you organize your thinking, which often is jumbled in our heads until we lay it out onto paper. A lot of the time, the simplest act is the most rewarding. And writing is the perfect example of that. So if you're thinking maybe it's time to upgrade your reading and get to the end of a book feeling more satisfied, then you might be wondering, well, what do I actually write? So here I'd like to share some basic note-taking techniques that really help me dissect the books and walk away with the most precious ideas. Some of these I've stolen from Mortimer Adler, who's the author of How to Read a Book, but others I've just picked up along the way through years of experimentation. And I found that, at least for me, they work a charm, and I hope it's the same for you. If I could use only one technique on this list, it would be this one. Because not only does it help you arrange your thinking, but you can use this technique to understand even difficult books. All you have to do is take the author's points and rephrase it in your own words. So picture this, you're reading philosophy and the author didn't get the memo for the word count. So they're sitting there just rambling, talking, and they present you this big, fat, ugly block of text. And you don't know what to do with it. It's difficult to understand and you're almost stuck at what to do. So, okay, you slow down, you break it apart, you process it, you see how everything fits together, and then you do the simple act of writing a sentence to summarize what you just read. After this, the dust has settled. You've stripped away all the unimportant details and you've found the essence of what the author has to say, the thing that matters to you. And all of a sudden, it's so much easier to process and to really take this idea away with you. And because you've used your own words, you prove to yourself that you understand it. And as a little bonus benefit, when I reread a book or go back to process it, I use these sentences almost as a way to get me back in the flow quickly. Because it's a huge pain in the ass to have to reread that paragraph and understand everything from scratch. Do you remember that friend from earlier who pretends to listen to you? Well, let me ask you, what is the opposite of that? It's not only someone who's interested in what you have to say, but someone who's active in the conversation. When someone asks questions and is really engaged in what we have to say, we feel valued and our words feel like they matter. And there's no better feeling, to be honest. This same logic applies to our books. We as readers listen to the author. And what do good listeners do? They ask questions. All education since the beginning of time boils down to that, asking questions. So if we're failing to do that in our own reading, then we're missing out on a lot of potential. As you read, your mind should be alive. It should be looking for inconsistencies, maybe unanswered questions or tangents that you can follow up on. And if you write this down as a question, you almost prime your mind to look for the answer, like a mini game. It defines a clear goal in your learning, something that you can then go and solve. Now, in my experience, if you write down a question in a book, it's usually answered in the next few pages as the story unfolds or the author elaborates. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you're left with an unanswered question even as you finish the book. And at that point, the book almost sets you off on the natural next step to find the answer to this question. It's then up to you to go out and satisfy this curiosity. And nothing feels better than when you find the answer and it just clicks in your mind. One of my main principles in all of learning is that you should make the process as easy as possible for yourself. You have enough problems already. So with a tiny bit of extra effort in the present, you can avoid a hassle later on. And this next note-taking style is the perfect way to do that. When I deal with books that argue an idea or they flesh out a concept, I like to number the individual points in the margin. So 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Last year, I read How to Take Smart Notes by Carran. Now, correct me on that pronunciation, but the point is, he uses a very clear and orderly structure, as you'd expect from a German. So say when I read a chapter on critical thinking, I can see that each paragraph is a sub-argument to the bigger argument. And I remember I would write 1, 2, 3, 4 in the margins, and that would let me see exactly where the argument started and where it ended. And then once I return to process these notes or maybe reread the book, all it takes for me is a quick glance at the page and I can see immediately how it's structured. It's the most literal way to dissect a book. You divide it, you conquer each part individually, and then you walk away with knowledge that you can be happy with. This next technique is the most common, and I bet you do it already. Underlining important points. Now, I have beef with underlining. It's the most common method of analysis, but I see most people using it as a crutch rather than a tool to help them. The uncomfortable truth is, underlining important bits is useless unless you return to process them somehow. Now, when I was in school, and you probably did the same thing, but I'd get a textbook and I'd highlight as I go. And I would end up highlighting half the page. And I thought I was doing something good. It felt productive and I felt I was learning. But this couldn't be further from the truth. I was lying to myself. This didn't help me remember more, and I certainly wasn't understanding it better. And it cost me probably months, maybe years in wasted time and effort. And it sounds like I'm painting a bad picture of underlining here, but I still do it today. So what gives? How does that work? The only reason I underline sentences is so once I return to process what I've read, I can easily spot the important parts. I treat underlining not as a tool for learning itself, but as a quality of life change that helps me later in the process. When I finish a book, I'll always go back to the beginning and have a flick through it again. But this time I only focus on anything I've underlined. This lets me ignore the rest and really narrow in on what my past self thought was important. I then take these important ideas and give them a formal write-up in Obsidian, which is my note-taking software. My learning has never felt better after doing this. Yes, it takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, and sometimes it's even frustrating, but the quality is unmatched, and it works really well for me. So the underlining is there just to be my assistant in the process, to help me see what I need to write. It's the same as marking a spot on the map where you hid your treasure, so you can go back and find it later. Reading can be hard, so everything to make your life a little bit easier is worth it in my eyes. Now, before we continue, first I'd like to thank you for watching this far, and I'd like to announce that this video is sponsored by me, because I'm starting a mailing list. And it was long overdue. I've been procrastinating for ages, but it's finally a thing. Of course, you can expect more insights on reading, writing, creativity, the Renaissance man ideal, all these things we already discussed on the channel. But of course, there's also room for different types of content. Maybe a deeper look into the books themselves, or maybe for the mini essays, as I talked about in a previous video. To tell you the truth, I have no plan. We'll get it started and I'm going to tailor it to serve you the best with all your feedback and advice. So I'd be grateful if you use the link in the description to subscribe. And of course, it's totally free. So let's get back to note-taking. James Carran is one of my favorite writers on Twitter. And he pointed out something that changed how I saw reading and writing forever. And even better, it lifted a burden off my shoulders. The stress of being too original. In a tweet, he said that ever since the first dictionary was published, everything beyond that point has just been a remix of it. Now, yes, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but the point stands. There are no truly, fully original works anymore. Truly original new writing is impossible because every work in the present is inspired by something from the past. And at first it sounds crushing. It sounds like every creative realm is oversaturated and there's no room for you to thrive in it. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Nothing is totally original, and that's okay. You don't have to reinvent the wheel to produce great work. And even if the core itself is copied from older works, you still have the creative freedom to add your own twist to it and make it yours. In Breaking Bad, Walter White's downfall was a result of his pride and ambition, but you can say the same for Macbeth hundreds of years ago, or even Agamemnon over 2,000 years ago. Okay, so that's that. Why am I talking about literary history in a video about note-taking? Well, as I read, I love to make connections. If I see an idea that reminds me of something else from another book, I write that down. And when I process these notes later, I really emphasize and focus on that connection. To see ideas from different books come together, that's the most rewarding experience in reading. It's how you piece together this worldview that's more complete, and you find the most interesting perspectives. Like I said before, you're probably reading stuff that isn't original. But once you mix ideas and connect them, you form new thoughts, new ideas, original thinking, a fresh angle to the same problem, something that you're proud to call your own. I saved one of the best for last, because with this technique, you can take what you've learned and almost package it in this neat little summary that you can then walk away with. It's also great for countering a reader's worst nightmare. Say you finished a book and this book was so good that it almost gave you goosebumps. It was life-changing, truly. So naturally, you rush to tell a friend and you rush to share the experience and hopefully convince them to read it too. You start to tell them about the book, but you realize that your excitement is being replaced by embarrassment. You realize you can't articulate what the book is about. You try and share your experience and really hype up the book, but it just comes out as a messy jumble. It doesn't really sound exciting at all when you say it, and you can see that they don't care from their facial expressions. It's almost humiliating, and this note-taking technique makes it a thing of the past. As I read, I will write a summary of each chapter on the blank pages at the end of the book. And this really helps me understand what I've just read, but also learn how the book is divided and how it all ties together. Of course, it feels obvious as you read, like, yeah, this chapter is about this and it relates to the book in this way. But sometimes it's hard to truly understand that unless you have it down on paper. For example, I did this with a book called Tribe by Sebastian Junger. Now, I don't have it here, I'm afraid, but this was an easy example, so I'm going to use it. Now, I'm confident in giving you a summary of that book. It's about how humans need belonging and connection to live a meaningful life, and how many aspects of the modern world have kind of eroded that away. And in each chapter, he uses examples from different societies and events to show this. But the point is, I can only do that because I wrote chapter summaries at the end. It gave me the room to mentally categorize the book and understand how it was structured. And doing the same thing yourself is easy. As you finish a chapter, you go to the back of the book, write the chapter name or number, and simply just a few bullet points summarizing the gist of it. It takes just a few seconds. And that is all I have to offer. Those are the techniques that, after years of experimentation, I've settled on and have really found a place in my reading approach, you could say. And of course, I'm dying to hear what you do. Like, how do you approach your book? How do you write notes in it? Because I'm sure you probably have some excellent strategies that I didn't think of or someone else could use. So as you know, my emails are open, the comments are open. I'd love to hear it. Thanks for watching.